chosen ones. This is not random. This is not coincidence. You did not arrive at this moment by accident. You were positioned here, ordered here, interrupted here. There is a reason your spirit feels alert right now. There is a reason your breathing shifted. There is a reason your attention tightened the moment you heard these words. Heaven does not waste moments, and this moment is not being wasted on you. Listen carefully. Something has been trying to reach you, not loudly, not dramatically, but persistently, subtly, repeatedly. A nudge, a disruption, a change in rhythm, an unusual stirring in your spirit. You almost brushed it off. Pause. Breathe. This is a spiritual alert. There are seasons when God whispers comfort, seasons when he speaks direction, and then seasons when he interrupts. You are in an interruption season, not to harm you, not to frighten you, but to redirect you, because there is a sign you cannot afford to overlook. This is not fear-driven. This is destiny-driven. Something is shifting, and if you ignore it, you delay what heaven has already authorized. Pause. Let that settle. You have been sensing that something is different. Conversations feel different. Doors feel different. Even your own reactions feel different. You are not imagining it. Behind the scenes, there is movement. Spiritual movement. Delay is not denial. Delay is divine calibration. When something seems postponed, heaven is aligning unseen variables. Preparation is not punishment. It is strengthening the hidden process where capacity is built, so elevation does not cause collapse. Alignment is when your spirit, your obedience, and divine timing converge. And it feels uncomfortable because misaligned things must fall away. Endurance is not passive suffering. It is active stability, remaining grounded while pressure increases. Spiritual resistance is not always attack. Sometimes it is friction revealing what still needs refining. Refinement is the fire that removes what cannot go with you into the next season. Pause. What you have been experiencing is not random stress. It is refinement. The delays were not rejection. They were alignment. The closed doors were not cruelty. They were correction. Resistance increases when you approach significance. Pressure intensifies when something valuable is about to emerge. You thought the tension meant you were off track, but the tension is evidence you are near transition. There are signs that precede divine acceleration. Discomfort with what used to satisfy you, restlessness in familiar environments, heightened awareness, sudden clarity about what must end. These are not mood swings, they are signals, and if you dismiss them, you postpone your own advancement. You prayed for clarity, now clarity is arriving in ways that require courage. You asked for elevation, now elevation requires separation. You asked for purpose, now purpose demands pruning. Behind the scenes, heaven has been adjusting relationships, reassigning connections, rearranging timelines. Conversations you thought failed were redirected. Opportunities that collapsed were protection. You felt confusion, but there was orchestration. There are divine windows, specific periods when obedience unlocks acceleration, when alignment releases favor, when small decisions trigger large outcomes. You are standing near one of those windows, and that is why the pressure increased. Pressure does not arrive before stagnation. It arrives before expansion. A seed compresses before it sprouts. A muscle tears before it strengthens. Birth requires pressure before life emerges. Some of you have felt emotional waves you cannot explain, moments of deep reflection, unexpected tears, sudden conviction, sharp awareness of misalignment. You thought you were becoming unstable, but you are becoming sensitive, sensitive to timing, sensitive to correction. Spiritual sensitivity feels like vulnerability at first, but it is precision. You are being tuned, and tuning does not feel comfortable. When you are near movement, distraction increases. Old habits resurface. Old voices reappear. Old temptations whisper. When destiny is near, sabotage attempts increase. You may have noticed unusual fatigue, not just physical but mental. A heaviness when you try to move forward, a strange resistance, to doing what you know you should do. That is not laziness. That is spiritual friction, and friction is proof that motion is occurring. You have felt alone in this process, misunderstood even by people close to you, because they cannot see what is shifting in you. But you are not alone. There are moments when God speaks gently and moments when He says, "Pay attention now." This is one of those moments. Do not numb what you are feeling. Do not silence the conviction. Do not rationalize the warning. There are signs in your life right now that are invitations to reposition, to step away, to step forward. If you ignore them, you prolong unnecessary cycles. If you honor them, you accelerate alignment. You have been asking why it is getting harder when you are trying to do right. Resistance increases before release. You have been asking why you feel pressure when you thought peace would come. Peace sometimes comes after confrontation. You have been asking why everything is being exposed at once. Exposure precedes purification. The pressure you feel is not proof of abandonment. It is proof of adjustment to a higher level, greater responsibility, answered prayer. The difference between those who step into the next season and those who circle the same mountain is discernment. Discern, meant of timing, of signals, of what must end. You cannot carry old patterns into new territory. You cannot hold on to expired connections and expect fresh fruit. You cannot ignore spiritual warnings and expect divine acceleration. That uneasy feeling, that internal check, that repeated nudge, is not anxiety. It is awareness. If this message is reaching you in your city, in your nation, wherever you are, comment your city and your country as a declaration that heaven's alert is reaching your location. And stay connected. Remain attentive. Do not disconnect from what is feeding your spirit in this hour. Because this is about positioning. The intensity is increasing because the window is narrowing. Divine timing windows do not remain open indefinitely. Delayed obedience becomes disobedience. And some of you have been postponing decisions you already know you must make, ending that cycle, leaving that compromise, speaking that truth, taking that step. You keep waiting for confirmation. This is confirmation. You keep waiting for a louder sign. This is the sign. When God shifts a season, He sends internal alerts before external changes. That restlessness, that conviction, that urgency is preparation for movement in career, in relationships, in calling, in identity. You are not who you were last year, and trying to hold on to a former version of yourself is exhausting you. Transitions are uncomfortable because they involve endings and beginnings simultaneously. Something is closing. Something is opening. You are standing in between, and the in-between feels unstable, but it is sacred. In the in-between, clarity sharpens, and courage is required. You feel the urgency because timing is converging. People are being moved into place. Opportunities are aligning. Doors are being prepared, but alignment requires response. You cannot sleep through this. You cannot dismiss this. This is the hour of attention. If a lesson keeps repeating, it is because it has not been integrated. If a warning keeps appearing, it is because it has not been honored. You are not being harassed. You are being guided. The intensity you feel is concentration. Heaven is concentrating on your trajectory. Something is about to shift. The pressure has been building. This is pre-breakthrough tension. When tension reaches its peak, release is near. Do not retreat now. This is the threshold, and thresholds require crossing. Crossing requires decision. Decision requires courage. Courage requires trust. Father, in the name of Jesus, I lift every person under the sound of this message, every chosen one who feels the pressure, who senses the shift, who stands at the edge of transition. I declare clarity over confusion, discernment over distraction, strength into weary minds. Break the grip of delay rooted in fear. Silence every internal voice that contradicts your instruction. Where there has been hesitation, release courage. Where there has been fog, release precision. Where there has been exhaustion, release supernatural endurance. Expose what must end. Reveal what must begin. Close doors that are traps. Open doors that are ordained. Shield them from sabotage, from deception, from doubt. I declare alignment over their timeline, acceleration where there has been stagnation, restoration where there has been loss, healing where there has been hidden strain. Let clarity rise like light breaking through darkness. Let pressure convert into power. I command every cycle that has overstayed its season to break now. I declare protection over their mind, their household, their calling. No weapon formed against their destiny will prosper. They will not ignore the signal. They will not retreat at the threshold. Anchor them in obedience, awareness, courage. Let peace flood them as they step forward. This is their season of attention, alignment, crossing, and I declare it sealed. The sign has been given. The window is open. The shift is active. You will respond. You will align. You will step forward. What has been building behind the scenes will manifest before you. It will not be delayed. It will not be stolen. It will not be reversed. It is established, and it begins now.
13. Miracles. First published in The Guardian, 2nd of October 1942, the text was expanded and preached as a sermon in St. Jude on the Hill Church, London, subsequently appearing in St. Jude's Gazette, No. 73, October 1942. It was later published in Undeceptions, 1971, and is now in God in the Dock, 1998. I have known only one person in my life who claimed to have seen a ghost. It was a woman, and the interesting thing is that she disbelieved in the immortality of the soul before seeing the ghost, and still disbelieves after having seen it. She thinks it was a hallucination. In other words, seeing is not believing. This is the first thing to get clear in talking about miracles. Whatever experiences we may have, we shall not regard them as miraculous if we already hold a philosophy which excludes the supernatural. Any event which is claimed as a miracle is, in the last resort, an experience received from the senses, and the senses are not infallible. We can always say we have been the victims of an illusion. If we disbelieve in the supernatural, this is what we always shall say. Hence, whether miracles have really ceased or not, they would certainly appear to cease in Western Europe as materialism became the popular creed. For let us make no mistake, if the end of the world appeared in all the literal trappings of the apocalypse, the modern materialist saw with his own eyes the heavens rolled up, Revelation chapter 6, verse 14, and the great white throne appearing, chapter 20, verse 11. If he had the sensation of being himself hurled into the lake of fire, chapter 19, verse 20, chapter 20, verses 10, 14, and 15, chapter 21, verse 8, he would continue forever in that lake itself, to regard his experience as an illusion, and to find the explanation of it in psychoanalysis or cerebral pathology. Experience by itself proves nothing. If a man doubts whether he is dreaming or waking, no experiment can solve his doubt, since every experiment may itself be part of the dream. Experience proves this or that or nothing according to the preconceptions we bring to it. This fact, that the interpretation of experience depends on preconceptions, is often used as an argument against miracles. It is said that our ancestors, taking the supernatural for granted and greedy of wonders, read the miraculous into events that were really not miracles. And in a sense I grant it. That is to say, I think that just as our preconceptions would prevent us from apprehending miracles if they really occurred, so their preconceptions would lead them to imagine miracles even if they did not occur. In the same way, the doting man will think his wife faithful when she is not, and the suspicious man will not think her faithful when she is. The question of her actual fidelity remains meanwhile to be settled, if at all, on other grounds. But there is one thing often said about our ancestors which we must not say. We must not say, they believed in miracles because they did not know the laws of nature. This is nonsense. When St. Joseph discovered that his bride was pregnant, he was minded to put her away. Matthew chapter 1, verse 19. He knew enough biology for that. Otherwise, of course, he would not have regarded pregnancy as a proof of infidelity. When he accepted the Christian explanation, he regarded it as a miracle precisely because he knew enough of the laws of nature to know that this was a suspension of them. When the disciples saw Christ walking on the water, Matthew chapter 14 verse 26, Mark chapter 6 verse 49, John chapter 6 verse 19, they were frightened. They would not have been frightened unless they had known the laws of nature and known that this was an exception. If a man had no conception of a regular order in nature, then of course he could not notice departures from that order. Just as a dunce who does not understand the normal meter of a poem is also unconscious of the poet's variations from it. Nothing is wonderful except the abnormal, and nothing is abnormal until we have grasped the norm. Complete ignorance of the laws of nature would preclude the perception of the miraculous just as rigidly as complete disbelief in the supernatural precludes it, perhaps even more so. For while the materialist would have at least to explain miracles away, the man wholly ignorant of nature would simply not notice them. The experience of a miracle, in fact, requires two conditions. First, we must believe in a normal stability of nature, which means we must recognize that the data offered by our senses recur in regular patterns. Secondly, we must believe in some reality beyond nature. When both beliefs are held, and not till then, we can approach with an open mind the various reports which claim that this super or extra-natural reality has sometimes invaded and disturbed the sensuous content of space and time which makes our natural world. The belief in such a supernatural reality itself can neither be proved nor disproved by experience. The arguments for its existence are metaphysical and to me conclusive. They turn on the fact that even to think and act in the natural world, we have to assume something beyond it, and even assume that we partly belong to that something. In order to think, we must claim for our own reasoning a validity which is not credible if our thought is merely a function of our brain, and our brains a byproduct of irrational physical processes. In order to act above the level of mere impulse, we must claim a similar validity for our judgments of good and evil. In both cases, we get the same disquieting result. The concept of nature itself is one we have reached only tacitly by claiming a sort of supernatural status for ourselves. If we frankly accept this position and then turn to the evidence, we find, of course, that accounts of the supernatural meet us on every side. History is full of them, often in the same documents which we accept wherever they do not report miracles. Respectable missionaries report them not infrequently. The whole Church of Rome claims their continued occurrence. Intimate conversation elicits from almost every acquaintance at least one episode in his life which is what he would call queer or rum. No doubt most stories of miracles are unreliable, but then, as anyone can see by reading the papers, so are most stories of all events. Each story must be taken on its merits. What one must not do is to rule out the supernatural as the one impossible explanation. Thus you may disbelieve in the Mons angels because you cannot find a sufficient number of sensible people who say they saw them. But if you found a sufficient number, it would, in my view, be unreasonable to explain this by collective hallucination. For we know enough of psychology to know that spontaneous unanimity in hallucination is very improbable. And we do not know enough of the supernatural to know that a manifestation of angels is equally improbable. The supernatural theory is the less improbable of the two. When the Old Testament says that Sennacherib's invasion was stopped by angels, 2 Kings chapter 19 verse 35, and Herodotus says it was stopped by a lot of mice who came and ate up all the bowstrings of his army, an open-minded man will be on the side of the angels. Unless you start by begging the question, there is nothing intrinsically unlikely in the existence of angels, or in the action ascribed to them. But mice just don't do these things. A great deal of skepticism now current about the miracles of our Lord does not, however, come from disbelief of all reality beyond nature. It comes from two ideas which are respectable but I think mistaken. In the first place, modern people have an almost aesthetic dislike of miracles. Admitting that God can, they doubt if he would. To violate the laws he himself has imposed on his creation seems to them arbitrary, clumsy, a theatrical device only fit to impress savages, a solecism against the grammar of the universe. In the second place, many people confuse the laws of nature with the laws of thought, and imagine that their reversal or suspension would be a contradiction in terms, as if the resurrection of the dead were the same sort of thing as 2 and 2 making 5. I have only recently found the answer to the first objection. I found it first in George MacDonald, and later in St. Athanasius. This is what St. Athanasius says in his little book on the Incarnation. Our Lord took a body like ours and lived as a man, in order that those who had refused to recognize him in his superintendence and captaincy of the whole universe might come to recognize from the works he did here below in the body that what dwelled in this body was the Word of God. This accords exactly with Christ's own account of his miracles. The Son can do nothing of himself but what he seeth the Father do. John chapter 5, verse 19. The doctrine, as I understand it, is something like this. There is an activity of God displayed throughout creation, a wholesale activity, let us say, which men refuse to recognize. The miracles done by God incarnate, living as a man in Palestine, perform the very same things as this wholesale activity, but at a different speed and on a smaller scale. One of their chief purposes is that men, having seen a thing done by personal power on the small scale, may recognize, when they see the same thing done on the large scale, that the power behind it is also personal, is indeed the very same person who lived among us 2,000 years ago. The miracles, in fact, are a retelling in small letters of the very same story which is written across the whole world in letters too large for some of us to see. Of that larger script, part is already visible, part is still unsolved. In other words, some of the miracles do locally what God has already done universally. Others do locally what he has not yet done but will do. In that sense, and from our human point of view, some are reminders and others prophecies. God creates the vine, and teaches it to draw up water by its roots, and, with the aid of the sun, to turn that water into a juice which will ferment and take on certain qualities. Thus, every year, from Noah's time till ours, God turns water into wine. That men fail to see. Either, like the pagans, they refer the process to some finite spirit, Bacchus or Dionysus, or else, like the moderns, they attribute real and ultimate causality to the chemical and other material phenomena which are all that our senses can discover in it. But when Christ at Cana makes water into wine, the mask is off. John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11. The miracle has only half its effect if it only convinces us that Christ is God. It will have its full effect if, whenever we see a vineyard or drink a glass of wine, we remember that here works he who sat at the wedding party in Cana. Every year God makes a little corn into much corn. The seed is sown, and there is an increase, and men, according to the fashion of their age, say, "It is Ceres, it is Adonis, it is the corn king," or else, "It is the laws of nature." The close-up, the translation of this annual wonder, is the feeding of the 5,000. Matthew chapter 14, verses 15 to 21, Mark chapter 6, verses 34 to 44, Luke chapter 9, verses 12 to 17, John chapter 6, verses 1 to 11. Bread is not made there of nothing. Bread is not made of stones, as the devil once suggested to our Lord in vain. Matthew chapter 4, verse 3, Luke chapter 4, verse 3. A little bread is made into much bread. The Son will do nothing but what he sees the Father do. There is, so to speak, a family style. The miracles of healing fall into the same pattern. This is sometimes obscured for us by the somewhat magical view we tend to take of ordinary medicine. The doctors themselves do not take this view. The magic is not in the medicine, but in the patient's body. What the doctor does is to stimulate nature's functions in the body, or to remove hindrances. In a sense, though we speak for convenience of healing a cut, every cut heals itself. No dressing will make skin grow over a cut on a corpse. That same mysterious energy which we call gravitational when it steers the planets and biochemical when it heals a body is the efficient cause of all recoveries. And if God exists, that energy, directly or indirectly, is his. All who are cured by him, the healer within. But once he did it visibly, a man meeting a man. Where he does not work within in this mode, the organism dies. Hence, Christ's one miracle of destruction is also in harmony with God's wholesale activity. His bodily hand, held out in symbolic wrath, blasted a single fig tree. Matthew chapter 21 verse 19, Mark chapter 11 verses 13 to 20. But no tree died that year in Palestine, or any year, or in any land, or even ever will, save because he has done something, or, more likely, ceased to do something to it. When he fed the thousands, he multiplied fish as well as bread. Look in every bay and almost every river. This swarming, pulsating fecundity shows he is still at work. The ancients had a god called Genius, the god of animal and human fertility, the presiding spirit of gynecology, embryology, or the marriage bed, the genial bed as they called it after its god Genius. As the miracles of wine and bread and healing showed who Bacchus really was, who Ceres, who Apollo, and that all were one, so this miraculous multiplication of fish reveals the real Genius. And with that we stand at the threshold of the miracle which, for some reason, most offends modern ears. I can understand the man who denies the miraculous altogether. But what does one make of the people who admit some miracles but deny the virgin birth? Is it that for all their lip service to the laws of nature, there is only one law of nature that they really believe? Or is it that they see in this miracle a slur upon sexual intercourse, which is rapidly becoming the one thing venerated in a world without veneration? No miracle is, in fact, more significant. What happens in ordinary generation? What is a father's function in the act of begetting? A microscopic particle of matter from his body fertilizes the female. And with that microscopic particle passes, it may be, the color of his hair, and his great-grandfather's hanging lip, and the human form in all its complexity of bones, liver, sinews, heart, and limbs, and pre-human form which the embryo will recapitulate in the womb. Behind every spermatozoon lies the whole history of the universe. Locked within it is no small part of the world's future. That is God's normal way of making a man, a process that takes centuries, beginning with the creation of matter itself, and narrowing to 1 second and 1 particle at the moment of begetting. And once again, men will mistake the sense impressions which this creative act throws off for the act itself, or else refer it to some finite being such as Genius. Once, therefore, God does it directly, instantaneously, without a spermatozoon, without the millenniums of organic history behind the spermatozoon. There was, of course, another reason. This time he was creating not simply a man, but the man who was to be himself, the only true man. The process which leads to the spermatozoon has carried down with it through the centuries much undesirable silt. The life which reaches us by that normal route is tainted. To avoid that taint, to give humanity a fresh start, he once short-circuited the process. There is a vulgar anti-God paper which some anonymous donor sends me every week. In it recently I saw the taunt that we Christians believe in a God who committed adultery with the wife of a Jewish carpenter. The answer to that is that if you describe the action of God in fertilizing Mary as adultery, then, in that sense, God would have committed adultery with every woman who ever had a baby. For what he did once without a human father, he does always, even when he uses a human father as his instrument. For the human father in ordinary generation is only a carrier, sometimes an unwilling carrier, always the last in a long line of carriers of life that comes from the supreme life. Thus the filth that our poor, muddled, sincere, resentful enemies fling at the Holy One either does not stick, or, sticking, turns into glory. So much for the miracles which do, small and quick, what we have already seen in the large letters of God's universal activity. But before I go on to the second class, those which foreshadow parts of the universal activity we have not yet seen, I must guard against a misunderstanding. Do not imagine I am trying to make the miracles less miraculous. I am not arguing that they are more probable because they are less unlike natural events. I am trying to answer those who think them arbitrary, theatrical, unworthy of God, meaningless interruptions of universal order. They remain, in my view, wholly miraculous. To do instantly with dead and baked corn what ordinarily happens slowly with live seed is just as great a miracle as to make bread of stones. Just as great, but a different kind of miracle. That is the point. When I open Ovid or Grimm, I find the sort of miracles which really would be arbitrary. Trees talk, houses turn into trees, magic rings raise tables richly spread with food in lonely places, ships become goddesses, and men are changed into snakes or birds or bears. It is fun to read about. The least suspicion that it had really happened would turn that fun into nightmare. You find no miracles of that kind in the Gospels. Such things, if they could be, would prove that some alien power was invading nature. They would not in the least prove that it was the same power which had made nature and rules her every day. But the true miracles express not simply a God, but God, that which is outside nature not as a foreigner, but as her sovereign. They announce not merely that a king has visited our town, but that it is the king, our king. The second class of miracles, on this view, foretell what God has not yet done, but will do universally. He raised one man, the man who was himself, from the dead, because he will one day raise all men from the dead. Perhaps not only men, for there are hints in the New Testament that all creation will eventually be rescued from decay, restored to shape, and subserve the splendor of remade humanity. The Transfiguration, Matthew chapter 17 verses 1 to 9, Mark chapter 9 verses 2 to 10, and the walking on the water, Matthew chapter 14 verse 26, Mark chapter 6 verse 49, John chapter 6 verse 19, are glimpses of the beauty and the effortless power over all matter which will belong to men when they are really waked by God. Now, resurrection certainly involves reversal of natural process, in the sense that it involves a series of changes moving in the opposite direction to those we see. At death, matter which has been organic falls back gradually into the inorganic, to be finally scattered and used perhaps in other organisms. Resurrection would be the reverse process. It would not, of course, mean the restoration to each personality of those very atoms, numerically the same, which had made its first or natural body. There would not be enough to go round, for one thing, and for another, the unity of the body, even in this life, was consistent with a slow but perplexed change of its actual ingredients. But it certainly does mean matter of some kind rushing towards organism as we now see it rushing away. It means, in fact, playing backwards a film we have already seen played forwards. In that sense, it is reversal of nature. But, of course, it is a further question whether reversal in this sense is necessarily contradiction. Do we know that the film cannot be played backwards? Well, in one sense, it is precisely the teaching of modern physics that the film never works backwards. For modern physics, as you have heard before, the universe is running down. Disorganization and chance are continually increasing. There will come a time, not infinitely remote, when it will be wholly run down, or wholly disorganized, and science knows of no possible return from that state. There must have been a time, not infinitely remote, in the past, when it was wound up, though science knows of no winding-up process. The point is that for our ancestors the universe was a picture. For modern physics it is a story. If the universe is a picture, these things either appear in that picture or not, and if they don't, since it is an infinite picture, one may suspect that they are contrary to the nature of things. But a story is a different matter, especially if it is an incomplete story. And the story told by modern physics might be told briefly in the words, Humpty Dumpty was falling. That is, it proclaims itself an incomplete story. There must have been a time before he fell, when he was sitting on the wall. There must be a time after he has reached the ground. It is quite true that science knows of no horses and men who can put him together again once he has reached the ground and broken. But then, she also knows of no means by which he could originally have been put on the wall. You wouldn't expect her to. All science rests on observation. All our observations are taken during Humpty Dumpty's fall, because we were born after he lost his seat on the wall and shall be extinct long before he reaches the ground. But to assume from observations taken while the clock is running down that the unimaginable winding up which must have preceded this process cannot occur when the process is over is the merest dogmatism. From the very nature of the case, the laws of degradation and disorganization which we find in matter at present cannot be the ultimate and eternal nature of things. If they were, there would have been nothing to degrade and disorganize. Humpty Dumpty can't fall off a wall that never existed. Obviously, an event which lies outside the falling or disintegrating process which we know as nature is not imaginable. If anything is clear from the records of our Lord's appearances after his resurrection, it is that the risen body was very different from the body that died, and that it lives under conditions quite unlike those of natural life. It is frequently not recognized by those who see it. Luke chapter 24, verses 13 to 31 and 36 to 37. John chapter 20, verses 14 to 16. And it is not related to space in the same way as our bodies. The sudden appearances and disappearances, Mark chapter 16, verse 14, Luke chapter 24, verses 31 and 36, John chapter 20, verses 19 and 26, suggest the ghost of popular tradition. Yet he emphatically insists that he is not merely a spirit, and takes steps to demonstrate that the risen body can still perform animal operations, such as eating. Luke chapter 24, verses 42 and 43, John chapter 21, verse 13. What makes all this baffling to us is our assumption that to pass beyond what we call nature, beyond the 3 dimensions and the 5 highly specialized and limited senses, is immediately to be in a world of pure negative spiritually, a world where space of any sort and sense of any sort have no function. I know no grounds for believing this. To explain even an atom, Schrödinger wants 7 dimensions, and give us new senses, and we should find a new nature. There may be natures piled upon natures, each supernatural to the one beneath it, before we come to the abyss of pure spirit. And to be in that abyss, at the right hand of the Father, may not mean being absent from any of these natures, may mean a yet more dynamic presence on all levels. That is why I think it very rash to assume that the story of the Ascension is mere allegory. I know it sounds like the work of people who imagined an absolute up and down and a local heaven in the sky. But to say this is, after all, to say, assuming that the story is fake, we could thus explain how it arose. Without that assumption, we find ourselves moving about in worlds unrealized, with no probability or improbability to guide us. For if the story is true, then a being still in some mode, though not our mode, corporeal, withdrew at his own will from the nature presented by our 3 dimensions and 5 senses, not necessarily into the non-sensuous and undimensioned, but possibly into or through a world or worlds of supersense and superspace. And he might choose to do it gradually. Who on earth knows what the spectators might see? If they say they saw a momentary movement along the vertical plane, then an indistinct mass, then nothing, who is to pronounce this improbable? My time is nearly up, and I must be very brief with the second class of people whom I promised to deal with. Those who mistake the laws of nature for laws of thought, and, therefore, think that any departure from them is a self-contradiction, like a square circle or 2 and 2 making 5. To think this is to imagine that the normal processes of nature are transparent to the intellect, that we can say why she behaves as she does. For, of course, if we cannot see why a thing is so, then we cannot see any reason why it should not be otherwise. But in fact, the actual course of nature is wholly inexplicable. I don't mean that science has not yet explained it, but may do some day. I mean that the very nature of explanation makes it impossible that we should even explain why matter has the properties it has. For explanation, by its very nature, deals with a world of ifs and ands. Every explanation takes the form, since A, therefore B, or if C, then D. In order to explain any event, you have to assume the universe as a going concern, a machine working in a particular way. Since this particular way of working is the basis of all explanation, it can never be itself explained. We can see no reason why it should not have worked a different way. To say this is not only to remove the suspicion that miracle is self-contradictory, but also to realize how deeply right St. Athanasius was when he found an essential likeness between the miracles of our Lord and the general order of nature. Both are a full stop for the explaining intellect. If the natural means that which can be fitted into a class, that which obeys a norm, that which can be paralleled, that which can be explained by reference to other events, then nature herself as a whole is not natural. If a miracle means that which must simply be accepted, the unanswerable actuality which gives no account of itself but simply is, then the universe is one great miracle. To direct us to that great miracle is one main object of the earthly acts of Christ. They are, as he himself said, signs. Matthew chapter 12, verse 39, chapter 16, verse 4, chapter 24, verses 24 and 30, Mark chapter 13, verse 22, chapter 16, verses 17 and 20, Luke chapter 21, verses 11 and 25. They serve to remind us that the explanations of particular events which we derived from the given, the unexplained, the almost willful character of the actual universe are not explanations of that character. These signs do not take us away from reality, they recall us to it, recall us from our dream world of ifs and ands to the stunning actuality of everything that is real. They are focal points at which more reality becomes visible than we ordinarily see at once. I have spoken of how he made miraculous bread and wine, and of how, when the Virgin conceived, he had shown himself the true genius whom men had ignorantly worshipped long before. It goes deeper than that. Bread and wine were to have an even more sacred significance for Christians, and the act of generation was to be the chosen symbol among all mystics for the union of the soul with God. These things are no accidents. With him there are no accidents. When he created the vegetable world, he knew already what dreams the annual death and resurrection of the corn would cause to stir in pious pagan minds. He knew already that he himself must so die and live again, and in what sense, including and far transcending the old religion of the Corn King. He would say, "This is my body," Matthew chapter 26, verse 26, Mark chapter 14, verse 22, Luke chapter 22, verse 19, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 24. Common bread, miraculous bread, sacramental bread. These three are distinct, but not to be separated. Divine reality is like a fugue. All his acts are different, but they all rhyme or echo to one another. It is this that makes Christianity so difficult to talk about. Fix your mind on any one story or any one doctrine, and it becomes at once a magnet to which truth and glory come rushing from all levels of being. Our featureless pantheistic unities and glib rationalist distinctions are alike defeated by the seamless yet ever-varying texture of reality, the liveness, the elusiveness, the intertwined harmonies of the multidimensional fertility of God. But if this is the difficulty, it is also one of the firm grounds of our belief. To think that this was a fable, a product of our own brains as they are a product of matter, would be to believe that this vast symphonic splendor had come out of something much smaller and emptier than itself. It is not so. We are nearer to the truth in the vision seen by Julian of Norwich, when Christ appeared to her holding in his hand a little thing like a hazelnut, and saying, "This is all that is created." And it seemed to her so small and weak that she wondered how it could hold together at all.
I want to talk about philia. In our age, it's much harder to talk about this than about storge and eros. When those are your theme, you find a prepared audience. Their importance and beauty and value have been stressed and indeed exaggerated again and again. But very few modern people think friendship a relation of comparable importance. We readily admit that besides a wife and family, a man wants a few friends. But the very tone of the admission, the very meaning it gives to the word friends, make it clear that friendship is very far from being regarded as a main course in life's banquet, or even a course at all. It's more like the bread you crumble almost unconsciously during a long dinner. It's one of the etc. Why this has happened is well worth inquiry. The first and most obvious answer is that most people don't think about it because a great many people don't experience it. It's hard to get through life without encountering some kind and degree of both eros and storge. And of course it's impossible that life should go on unless many people felt both, because without eros none of us would be begotten, and without storge none of us would be reared. The peculiarity of friendship is that it's not unavoidable. Thousands of people have lived and died without knowing it. To be sure, 900 of each thousand will have had what we commonly call friends, people they drink with and play games with and chat with and cooperate with, perhaps amicably enough in their profession. But this useful and pleasant relationship is not of itself what I mean by friendship. There's lately arisen, too, a much nastier bit of evidence to show that the experience of philia is not universal. I mean, of course, the fact that if you speak of it with any seriousness, you are now quite likely to be suspected of homosexuality. This is extremely revealing. It doesn't at all prove that those who bring the charge are homosexual themselves, nor would I moralize upon them if they were. How a man can feel anything but bewildered pity for the genuinely homosexual, I've never been able to understand. What it does prove is that they have either never known friendship or never known eros. For I appeal to everyone who's known both to bear me witness that in some ways nothing is so unlike a friendship as a love affair. Lovers talk incessantly about their love, friends hardly ever about their friendship. Lovers talk incessantly to one another about one another, friends about anything rather than that. The characteristic posture of lovers is face to face, that of friends side by side. Admittedly, friendship between man and woman can turn into love, but the very fact that we can speak of turning into implies the difference. Of course, it's not to be denied that just as philia and normal eros may be united in the relationship of a man to a woman, so philia and perverse eros may be blended in a relation between persons of the same sex. In certain cultures, at certain periods, this has been common. In warlike societies, homosexuality is especially likely to creep into the relation between the mature brave and his young armour-bearer or squire. The Greek tradition of high heroic friendship is widely infected with pederasty. But things which can coexist are not therefore necessarily the same. They may in the long run be antagonistic. What might possibly confuse the issue is the fact that until quite modern times, male friendship normally expressed itself through kisses, embraces, and tears. Such behaviour might be connected with a repressed erotic element, but no one with any historical sense could suppose this was always so. Its very prevalence proves the opposite. The erotic diagnosis has implications too comic to be accepted. I can't believe that Johnson embraced Boswell for that reason. The truth is, of course, that what needs explaining, what is anomalous and eccentric, is not the demonstrative gestures of old friendship, but the apparent coldness of ours. The marked repugnance which I, like many moderns, feel for any close physical contact with my own sex may itself be mildly pathological. Now, this modern suspicion of friendship by the amateur psychological wiseacres, the modern indifference to it shown by nearly everyone, the possibility of passing a whole life without experience of it, and the immense prestige which it once enjoyed and has now lost, are not unrelated phenomena. They all spring from one fact, the fact that philia is in one sense the least natural of the loves. It has least commerce with our nervous system. There's nothing throaty about it, nothing that quickens the pulse or makes you red or pale. It's not, in its full development, a biological necessity. The individual can live and breed and protect himself without it. Eros and storge are too obviously connected with the body, too widely shared with the beasts, too closely linked with biological necessity. In them one could almost feel that nature pulls the strings and we are the puppets. In philia, on the other hand, we have the feeling, whether illusory or not, of being free from all that. Hence, friendship alone of all the loves seemed to our ancestors to raise us to the level of gods or angels. Thus, some men have exalted and others have depreciated or denied the love called philia for exactly the same reason, because in it man seems furthest removed from the animal, from the irrational, and from necessity. This does not seem to me a good ground either for praising it or disparaging it. For, as I said before, nothing in man is either better or worse because he shares it with the beasts. Nor does anything need to be justified by its survival value. The things which make survival worth having are not to be rated below the things which enable us to survive. If everything that's not harnessed to the biological wagon is to be called perversion, then we must say, as I said before, that humanity itself, and the more human the more so, is the greatest perversion of all. In early communities, the cooperation of the males as hunters or fighters was no less necessary than the begetting and rearing of children. Long before history began, we men have got together apart from the women and done things. We had to. We not only had to do the things, we had to talk about them. We had to plan the hunt or fight, and when they were over we had to hold a post-mortem and draw conclusions for future use. We liked this even better. In all these pleasures there was a savour quite different from anything we usually experienced in our relationships with the women. Meanwhile, of course, the women were doing things together apart from us. Being a man, I naturally know less what they were like. But I know, as all men know, in my very bones what the men were doing. As some wag said, the caveman may or may not have had a club on his shoulder, but he quite certainly had a club in the other sense, a place where he sat and talked and talked. It was very probably part of his religion. But all this is not yet friendship. I don't at all want to undervalue the merely clubbable element in our lives. It's necessary. And perhaps of all relationships, camaraderie produces the fewest pains and the most pleasures, often wholly innocent and recreative pleasures. A life without it would be crippled. And for my own part, I have the deepest suspicions of those wretched people who find no pleasure in the society of their own sex. Heaven protect me from the man who needs only women and the woman who needs only men. But at the same time, we must insist that friendship is not simply camaraderie or companionship. Those who don't experience friendship or philia proper think that friend means only comrade or companion, one with whom we can collaborate easily or spend our leisure agreeably. But those who know philia make a distinction. Among their 100 or so comrades, only 5 or 6 may be in the true sense friends. Of course, in ordinary conversation, they apply the word friends to the whole 100, but that is a façon de parler, a polite fiction, like the adjective dear at the beginning of a letter. Those whose society we enjoy may fail in 2 different ways to qualify for the title of friends. First, we may enjoy a man's conversation without liking the man. He may be highly intelligent or amusing. So long as he will talk on a subject we want to learn about, or so long as he makes good jokes, we may be delighted. The moment the conversation moves on to a deeper level and forces us to attend to his personality, we may be repelled. We may even receive from him pleasures we're ashamed of, as when we listen to a scandalmonger. There are, it's true, people who seem never to make this distinction. Liking a man and liking his talk are for them all one. The confusion is elementary, but we needn't be surprised at it when we remember that other people can't distinguish between liking an actor's performance and liking the actor as a man, nor between enjoying a book and imagining that they like the author. But everyone can understand the opposite situation, in which we like the man but find his society rather dull. And so also there are wits whom we enjoy without love, without esteem, and without confidence. Secondly, there may be a man with whom, while we live in the same place or share the same job, while we have the same recreations, we seem to be in the relation of friendship. Then the chances of life separate us. We meet him 5 years later and find that when the first delighted greetings have passed and a few reminiscences have been interchanged, we have hardly a word to say to him nor he to us. Neither of us need have changed at all seriously in character, yet both have mistaken for a deep union of personalities what was really only a common stock of aims, hardships, hopes, fears, triumphs, annoyances and jokes, externally provided by the place or job they happened to share. Now it's just here that the friend is most clearly distinguishable from the companion. After almost any tract of time or any change of residence or occupation, the old unity will be intact. Everything will be taken up again as if we'd been parted only for a few hours. We've no need to fall back on reminiscences, though we may do so for the pleasure of it, but we're not reduced to them, whereas the attempted revival of mere companionship has no other coin. The difference between mere companionship and friendship depends on the nature of the shared activity. The men of the tribe sit talking together because they are all hunters and warriors. Take the individuals apart, place them for a few years in different cultures, using different techniques, facing different problems, and then reassemble them. I very much doubt if the old companionship, the old club, would come to life again. For the bond of union lay in their functions, not in the personalities of each. But if in that prehistoric club there had been two who went sometimes apart to talk of something which the rest had no bent for, two who were groping their way towards the beginnings of art or philosophy or religion, then I should expect that those two, at such a reunion as I'm imagining, would resume their old relationship. They are linked together not as warriors or trappers, but as men, as the very two men they were and are. The activity they shared, they always will share as long as they are the same men. As Montaigne says, a man is my friend because he is he, because I am I. Whereas a man is my comrade because he is my colleague or neighbour or ally. But does not Eros, does not the love between man and woman also say, because she is she, because I am I? Certainly, but Eros doesn't mean quite the same thing. Eros means because she is my goal, my journey's end, my quarry, because I need her and she me, because we are key and lock, thirst and water, seal and wax. But friendship means because he has the same goal, because he is taking the same journey, because he is hunting the same quarry, because we are both filled with the same need. I am speaking, of course, of Eros here in a sort of chemical purity from which, thank God, he is usually preserved in ordinary life, where happy Eros is nearly always combined with storge and very often with friendship too. Now, by saying that Eros can be combined with friendship, I have, you noticed, assumed that there can be friendship between a man and a woman. There are people who don't believe this. They think that any apparent instance of it is usually a disguise for Eros or the beginning of Eros. And there are also people who think there are no true friendships between women and women. Both views are, in my opinion, wrong as generalizations, but I am afraid they are likely enough to be true of many societies or classes within societies at certain periods. Companionship is the soil out of which friendships grow, and where the soil is lacking, of course, the plant will not exist. Where men work and women don't, or where they do quite different work, or again where men are educated and women not, or where the sexes have different educations, there will be no companionship and therefore no friendships between the sexes. They can meet only in Eros and Storge. For I don't think lovers can be in the true sense friends as well as lovers, unless they are the sort of man and the sort of woman who would have been friends even if they had not fallen in love. But quite often, though there was no companionship between the sexes, the women have had their own companionship parallel to and distinct from that of the men. In many primitive communities, they go together to the washing pools or to sow the fields. A whole female life, with its own labours, rituals, sometimes even its own language, is built up, and the men are as jealously excluded from it as the women are from theirs. That is one possible and tolerable state of affairs. Friendships between women and women, friendships between men and men, but none between the sexes. Another possible state of affairs, which I like very much better, is that which we see nowadays in those societies where men and women, rarely equal in education, collaborate in the same professions and have the same tastes. Real friendships can then arise both between women, and between women and men, and between men and men. But unfortunately, there are in the modern world quite a number of women who get the benefit of neither system. Such is many a well-to-do married woman in our own professional classes. What work she does, and labour-saving gimmicks have left her little to do, is done alone in her own flat or house. Other women are not her colleagues or comrades, they are merely visitors or neighbours. On the other hand, she may be totally unfitted for any real companionship, hence for any real friendship either with her husband or with any of his circle. Of course, she has had what is officially, almost ironically, called an education. But if her husband and his friends are, say, doctors, clergymen, lawyers, scholars or scientists, she is, for all the practical purposes of companionship with them, uneducated. They can't talk to her about the sort of things friends talk about. I don't mean merely the shop of their particular professions, but the whole world of ideas which presupposes a highly educated mind. Of course, affectionate husbands and polite, long-suffering friends will pretend it is otherwise. And of course, an aggressive woman will insist on being treated as if it were otherwise. But neither expedient helps. She can be taken to the right party. She may be laboriously dragged into the conversation. Her interruptions and misunderstandings may be endured with smiling patience. But she hasn't really got into the circle. The moment she joins it, it ceases to be the circle it was. Her very presence destroys it. She has frustrated the others and is frustrated herself. One cannot be surprised if she comes in the end to hate and fear friendship, as the enemy of Eros and Storge, the only love she can ever really have. I'm very sorry for the woman in this position. She has fallen between two stools, has lost the old camaraderie with her own sex, yet not advanced to the stage in which she could be the friend on a different level, either of women or of men. But I not only pity her, I also fear her. A huge, glossy and expensive weekly and monthly literature now exists for just such women. Through that, her fear and hatred of Philia may be becoming influential. Friendship is a development from mere companionship or camaraderie. It could indeed be defined as companionship transferred to a deeper level, transferred to those desires, fears, hopes or delights which make us the precise people we are. Hence, the very first step in friendship is not a movement of liking towards another man. That is the second step. First comes the shared activity. To care about something other than friends, even if it were only a hobby, is the precondition of friendship. If you're going nowhere, you can have no travelling companions. If you've nothing to share, you can share nothing. Friendships always come, if they come at all, unasked, unsought, as Keble said. Friends don't talk much about one another, nor about their friendship. On the eve of a long parting, in danger, in sorrow, they may express the deep love and unshakable loyalty that's between them. The very rarity of such explicitness may even make it especially poignant. But friendship would lose its essential character if they were frequent. The fact that friendship is thus normally unexpressed and merely implicit helps to conceal from some observers the truth that it's a form of love at all. It is manifest far more in its results than in any direct emotional impact, as a man's love of God is better gauged by the tenor of his whole life than by his moments of what the theologians call sensible consolation. This comes out strongly in its reaction to bereavement. We may feel in one sense, and at the moment, the death of a great friend less than the death of someone or something which we loved with very moderate storge, even an animal. The one may fill our eyes with tears, the other not. But the death of the object loved with storge may, after that momentary and not wholly painful tenderness, make hardly any difference to our lives. The death of the friend may impoverish us every year or every month till we die. We're like a man who has lost a limb. The stump may not ache, or not much, but no more tennis, no more mountain walks. Write it all off. Again, the seriousness and importance of friendship is masked for some people by a characteristic which is really its glory. It is unnecessary. It is arbitrary, a thing of choice. We are no way obliged to make any man a friend, and we have no claim that any man should become ours. It is more nearly disinterested than any other love. Friends may be useful and may increase our happiness, but it's impossible to make them our friends with this in view. In a word, it's free. And with this freedom goes a certain noble irresponsibility. I hope the word won't be misunderstood. Of course, we have responsibilities to every man. Every man is his brother's keeper. And if to leave any man unhelped or uncomforted, when help and comfort are in our power, is bad, so to leave a friend is worse. But such good offices are not the stuff of friendship. They're a byproduct. The mark of perfect friendship is not that help will be given, of course it will, when the pinch comes, but that, having been given, it makes no difference at all. It was an anomaly, a distraction. It had interrupted the conversation. For, of course, friends don't want to know one another's affairs at all. You can become friends with a man before you know whether he's married or single or how he earns his living. In a circle of true friends, each man stands for nothing but what he is. No one cares about anyone else's family or professional status or class or regional origin or nationality or previous history. In fact, all the things biographers want to know, they care nothing about. In time, of course, all these things will be revealed, but not for their own sake. They will come in accidentally. That is the delight of philia, the contact of stripped or disentangled souls. For eros, naked bodies; for friendship, naked personalities. You'll notice that I've passed inevitably from speaking of a pair of friends to speaking of a group. 2 is not, in fact, the perfect number for friendship. Hence, though jealousy can creep in here, as where not, friendship is by nature the least jealous of all loves. 2 friends will be glad to be joined by a third, and 3 by a fourth. When 2 or 3 or 5 of us, after a hard day's walking, have come to our inn, when our slippers are on and our feet spread out towards the blaze, and our drinks are at our elbows, and the whole world and something beyond the world opens itself to our minds, and no one has any claim on or any responsibility for any of the others, but all freemen and equals as if we just met half an hour ago, while nonetheless an affection mellowed by the years is there and fills up the chinks, then we may well wonder whether on the natural level there is anything better than this. And of course, in a sense, nothing is. Nothing is ever better than what's best in its own kind. The greatest wine cannot be better than a slice of perfectly good bread. It's no wonder, then, that past ages thought friendship the crown of life. It is the least jealous, the least demanding of loves, almost free from self-interest, immune from the internal corruptions of storge. It can, as the ancients thought, be a school of virtue. If men are good at all, they become better by mutual friendship. Each lives up to all the rest. We could easily be tempted to regard it, not merely as an analogy to, but a real foretaste of the heavenly unity. Notice, however, that Scripture has not chosen this sort of love as the symbol of divine love. It has chosen storge, God is our Father, and we his sons. It has chosen eros, Christ is the bridegroom of the church. More than that, the most completely animal and self-regarding of all our appetites has been chosen to become the vehicle of our most strictly commanded communion with God. Eat this, drink this. It looks as if God, or God's plans for our redemption, were not in the common sense of the word half so spiritual as the higher paganism supposed. He seems to descend deepest into nature when he intends to lift us highest. Blood and guts and glands and genes and things of that sort don't repel him. Negative spirituality, departure from the animal and the instinctive, doesn't of itself seem to please him particularly. By its spirituality, friendship escapes some of the obvious dangers of the other loves. Its danger lies precisely in its spirituality. Consider how a circle of friends, such as I've been describing, appears from outside. Almost every name given to it is in some degree unpleasant. It's a set, a coterie, a gang, a mutual admiration society. To belong to a group of real friends is to be armed in a degree which friendless men can't imagine against influences from without. The public opinion within the group may be tiny, but it matters more than the opinion of 10,000 outsiders. The approval of those whom we love and honour is the approval we value. Every knot of friends is thus a resistance movement. And of course the external pressures which it arms us to resist may be good ones or bad ones. In it we may retreat into something better or worse than the public world. It may be a nursery of martyrs or of criminals. In real life, friendship can unite by what is still good in them, men otherwise very bad, and thus fortify them in evil. There can, for example, be an aristocratic caste, very cruel and unjust to the rest of the world, but quite genuinely united within by friendships, mutual loves, honour and courtesy. The more real and even lofty the friendship within such a caste is, the more it may steel their nerves and stop their ears to all claims from without. The same man who would die for his brother in arms might not deny himself one bottle of wine or one game of cards to save a village of peasants from massacre. The sufferings and the moral judgments of outsiders don't affect him. It's the approval of his friends that matters. Friendship, as we've seen, is based on sharing at depth of activities and attitudes, a relation between souls side by side. The things shared may be good or bad or mixed. Friendship doesn't transform them. It raises them for good or ill to a higher power and gives them more confidence. It makes brave men braver, kind men kinder, pious men more pious, cruel men more cruel, proud men more proud. It underlines, endorses, sanctions, defends either from true or from false shame whatever they were doing already. If you and I want to evade some dangerous duty, the best plan is to find 2 or 3 other cowards and do our shirking in company. It's wonderful how little discomfort you'll feel when we've talked it all over and laughed it all over together. Equally, if we have to stand out against a real evil, to risk embarrassment and jeers and the possible loss of a job, the best plan is to get together with 2 or 3 other honest men. The ordeal will become amazingly less formidable. Friends, in a word, give us moral support or immoral support. I've glanced at extreme examples, but they're extremes of a moral ambivalence which is inherent in friendship. It can be a school of individual humility, but with this individual humility, how easily there comes a corporate pride. I may be unworthy, but we, the set, are magnificent. Loyalty to the spirit of a noble circle, adherence to its standards, has so often proved for us the road to goodness, that we may come to mistake it for goodness itself. To stand by our friends, to stick to the firm, to go down with the ship, these things being almost absolutes, may become absolutes. Aucassin in the story said he would rather go to hell with the knights and ladies and troubadours than to heaven with the hermits. Now a man must be very good, or, and that's the trouble, very bad, not to feel in himself a response to that gesture. A kind of heroic loyalty is often mixed with that corporate impenitence which binds bad men together in their last stand. Friendship is a resistance movement. It can resist God as well as society, and yet all the time by a kind of goodness, or what had been goodness in it. Friendship is the most spiritual loves, and therefore its corruption the most spiritual corruption. A certain kind of mother may be like a man-eating tigress, a certain kind of lover like a rutting animal. Storge and Eros can fall by animality. But friendship gone wrong liberates not the animal in man, but the titanic or diabolical. It is high-minded, it can have proud looks. By its nature it must and should defy popular opinion. It may go on to defy mercy and justice and God himself. This love too can breed unlove. Nothing, not even friendship, is good except goodness.
(3) The Funeral of a Great Myth. This essay was first published in Christian Reflections, 1998, and develops one of the myths in Is Theology Poetry? There are some mistakes which humanity has made and repented so often that there is now really no excuse for making them again. One of these is the injustice which every age does to its predecessor. For example, the ignorant contempt which the humanists Even good humanists like Sir Thomas More felt for medieval philosophy, or romantics, even good romantics like Keats, felt for 18th century poetry. Each time all this reaction and resentment has to be punished and unsaid. It is a wasteful performance. It is tempting to try whether we, at least, cannot avoid it. Why should we not give our predecessors a fair and filial dismissal? Such, at all events, is the attempt I am going to make in this paper. I come to bury the great myth of the 19th and early 20th century, but also to praise it. I am going to pronounce a funeral oration. By this great myth, I mean that picture of reality which resulted during the period under consideration, not logically but imaginatively, from some of the more striking and, so to speak, marketable theories of the real scientists. I have heard this myth called Wellsianity. The name is a good one, insofar as it does justice to the share which a great imaginative writer bore in building it up. But it is not satisfactory. It suggests, as we shall see, an error about the date at which the myth became dominant, and it also suggests that the myth affected only the middle-brow mind. In fact, it is as much behind Bridges' Testament of Beauty as it is behind the work of Wells. It dominates minds as different as those of Professor Alexander and Walt Disney. It is implicit in nearly every modern article on politics, sociology, and ethics. I call it a myth because it is, as I have said, the imaginative and not the logical result of what is vaguely called modern science. Strictly speaking, there is, I confess, no such thing as modern science. There are only particular sciences, all in a state of rapid change and sometimes inconsistent with one another. What the myth uses is a selection from the scientific theories, a selection made at first and modified afterwards in obedience to imaginative and emotional needs. It is the work of the folk imagination, moved by its natural appetite for an impressive unity. It therefore treats its data with great freedom, selecting, slurring, expurgating, and adding at will. The central idea of the myth is what its believers would call evolution, or development, or emergence, just as the central idea in the myth of Adonis is death and rebirth. I do not mean that the doctrine of evolution, as held by practicing biologists, is a myth. It may be shown by later biologists to be a less satisfactory hypothesis than was hoped 50 years ago, but that does not amount to being a myth. It is a genuine scientific hypothesis. But we must sharply distinguish between evolution as a biological theorem and popular evolutionism or developmentalism, which is certainly a myth. Before proceeding to describe it and, which is my chief business, to pronounce its eulogy, I had better make clear its mythical character. We have, first of all, the evidence of chronology. If popular evolutionism were, as it imagines itself to be, not a myth, but the intellectually legitimate result of the scientific theorem on the public mind, it would arise after that theorem had become widely known. We should have the theorem known first of all to a few, then adopted by all the scientists, then spreading to all men of general education, then beginning to affect poetry and the arts, and so finally percolating to the mass of the people. In fact, however, we find something quite different. The clearest and finest poetical expressions of the myth come before The Origin of Species was published, 1859, and long before it had established itself as scientific orthodoxy. There had, to be sure, been hints and germs of the theory in scientific circles before 1859. But if the mythopoeic poets were at all infected by those germs, they must have been very up-to-date indeed, very predisposed to catch the infection. Almost before the scientists spoke, certainly before they spoke clearly, imagination was ripe for it. The finest expression of the myth in English does not come from Bridges, nor from Shaw, nor from Wells, nor from Olaf Stapledon. It is this: As heaven and earth are fairer, fairer far than chaos and blank darkness, though once chiefs, and as we show beyond that heaven and earth in form and shape compact and beautiful, in will, in action free, companionship, and thousand other signs of purer life, so on our heels a fresh perfection treads, a power more strong in beauty born of us, and fated to excel us, as we pass in glory that old darkness. Thus Oceanus in Keats's Hyperion, nearly 40 years before the origin of species. And on the continent we have the Nibelung's Ring. Coming, as I do, to bury but also to praise the receding age, I will by no means join in the modern depreciation of Wagner. He may, for all I know, have been a bad man. He may, though I shall never believe it, have been a bad musician. But as a mythopoeic poet he is incomparable. The tragedy of the evolutionary myth has never been more nobly expressed than in his Wotan. Its heady raptures never more irresistibly than in Siegfried. That he himself knew quite well what he was writing about can be seen from his letter to August Rockel in 1854. The progress of the whole drama shows the necessity of recognizing and submitting to the change, the diversity, the multiplicity, the eternal novelty of the real. Wotan rises to the tragic height of willing his own downfall. This is all we have to learn from the history of man, to will the necessary and ourselves to bring it to pass. If Shaw's Back to Methuselah were really, as he supposed, the work of a prophet or a pioneer ushering in the reign of a new myth, its predominantly comic tone and its generally low emotional temperature would be inexplicable. It is admirable fun, but not thus are new epochs brought to birth. The ease with which he plays with the myth shows that the myth is fully digested and already senile. Shaw is the Lucian or the Snorri of this mythology. To find its Aeschylus or its Elder Edda, you must go back to Keats and Wagner. That, then, is the first proof that popular evolution is a myth. In making it, imagination runs ahead of scientific evidence. The prophetic soul of the big world was already pregnant with the myth. If science had not met the imaginative need, science would not have been so popular. But probably every age gets, within certain limits, the science it desires. In the second place, we have internal evidence. Popular evolutionism, or developmentalism, differs in content from the evolution of the real biologists. To the biologist, evolution is a hypothesis. It covers more of the facts than any other hypothesis at present on the market, and is therefore to be accepted unless or until some new supposal can be shown to cover still more facts with even fewer assumptions. At least, that is what I think most biologists would say. Professor D.M.S. Watson, it is true, would not go so far. According to him, evolution is accepted by zoologists not because it has been observed to occur or can be proved by logically coherent evidence to be true, but because the only alternative, special creation, is clearly incredible. This would mean that the sole ground for believing it is not empirical, but metaphysical. The dogma of an amateur metaphysician who finds special creation incredible. But I do not think it has really come to that. Most biologists have a more robust belief in evolution than Professor Watson. But it is certainly a hypothesis. In the myth, however, there is nothing hypothetical about it. It is basic fact. Or, to speak more strictly, such distinctions do not exist on the mythical level at all. There are more important differences to follow. In the science, evolution is a theory about changes. In the myth, it is a fact about improvements. Thus a real scientist, like Professor J.B.S. Haldane, is at pains to point out that popular ideas of evolution lay a wholly unjustified emphasis on those changes which have rendered creatures, by human standards, better or more interesting. He adds, "We are therefore inclined to regard progress as the rule in evolution. Actually, it is the exception, and for every case of it there are 10 of degeneration." But the myth simply expurgates the 10 cases of degeneration. In the popular mind, the word evolution conjures up a picture of things moving onwards and upwards, and of nothing else whatsoever. And it might have been predicted that it would do so. Already, before science had spoken, the mythical imagination knew the kind of evolution it wanted. It wanted the Keatsian and Wagnerian kind, the gods superseding the Titans, and the young, joyous, careless, amorous Siegfried superseding the careworn, anxious, treaty-entangled Wotan. If science offers any instances to satisfy that demand, they will be eagerly accepted. If it offers any instances that frustrate it, they will simply be ignored. Again, for the scientist, evolution is a purely biological theorem. It takes over organic life on this planet as a going concern, and tries to explain certain changes within that field. It makes no cosmic statements, no metaphysical statements, no eschatological statements. Granted that we now have minds we can trust, granted that organic life came to exist, it tries to explain, say, how a species that once had wings came to lose them. It explains this by the negative effect of environment operating on small variations. It does not, in itself, explain the origin of organic life, nor of the variations, nor does it discuss the origin and validity of reason. It may well tell you how the brain, through which reason now operates, arose, but that is a different matter. Still less does it even attempt to tell you how the universe as a whole arose, or what it is, or whither it is tending. But the myth knows nothing of these reticences. Having turned what was a theory of change into a theory of improvement, it then makes this a cosmic theory. Not merely terrestrial organisms, but everything is moving upwards and onwards. A reason has evolved out of instinct, virtue out of complexes, poetry out of erotic howls and grunts, civilization out of savagery, the organic out of inorganic, the solar system out of some sidereal soup or traffic block. And conversely, reason, virtue, art, and civilization as we now know them are only the crude or embryonic beginnings of far better things, perhaps deity itself, in the remote future. For in the myth, evolution, as the myth understands it, is the formula of all existence. To exist means to be moving from the status of almost zero to the status of almost infinity. To those brought up on the myth, nothing seems more normal, more natural, more plausible than that chaos should turn into order, death into life, ignorance into knowledge. And with this we reach the full-blown myth. It is one of the most moving and satisfying world dramas which have ever been imagined. The drama proper is preceded, do not forget the Rheingold here, by the most austere of all preludes, the infinite void and matter endlessly, aimlessly moving to bring forth it knows not what. Then by some millionth chance, what tragic irony, the conditions at one point of space and time bubble up into that tiny fermentation which we call organic life. At first, everything seems to be against the infant hero of our drama, just as everything always was against the seventh son or ill-used stepdaughter in a fairy tale. But life somehow wins through. With incalculable sufferings, the sorrows of the Volsungs were nothing to it. Against all but insuperable obstacles, it spreads, it breeds, it complicates itself. From the amoeba up to the reptile, up to the mammal. Life, here comes our first climax, wantons as in her prime. This is the age of monsters. Dragons prowl the earth, devour one another and die. Then the old irresistible theme of the younger son or the ugly duckling is repeated. As the weak, tiny spark of life herself began amidst the beasts that are far larger and stronger than he, there comes forth a little, naked, shivering, cowering biped, shuffling, not yet fully erect, promising nothing, the product of another millionth chance. His name in this myth is Man. Elsewhere he has been the young Beowulf, whom men at first thought a dastard, or the stripling David, armed only with a sling against mail-clad Goliath, or Jack the Giant Killer himself, or even Hop o' My Thumb. He thrives. He begins killing his giants. He becomes the caveman with his flints and his club, muttering and growling over his enemy's bones, almost a brute, yet somehow able to invent art, pottery, language, weapons, cookery, and nearly everything else. His name in another story is Robinson Crusoe, dragging his screaming mate by her hair, I do not exactly know why, tearing his children to pieces in fierce jealousy until they are old enough to tear him, and cowering before the terrible gods whom he has invented in his own image. But these were only growing pains. In the next act he becomes the true man. He learns to master nature. Science arises and dissipates the superstitions of his infancy. More and more he becomes the controller of his own fate. Passing hastily over the historical period, in it the upward and onward movement gets in places a little indistinct, but it is a mere nothing by the time scale we are using, We follow our hero on into the future, see him in the last act, though not the last scene, of this great mystery. A race of demigods now rule the planet, in some versions the galaxy. Eugenics have made certain that only demigods will now be born. Psychoanalysis, that none of them shall lose or smirch his divinity. Economics, that they shall have to hand all that demigods require. Man has ascended his throne. Man has become God. All is a blaze of glory. And now, mark well the final stroke of mythopoeic genius. It is only the more debased versions of the myth that end here. For to end here is a little pathetic, even a little vulgar. If we stopped at this point, the story would lack the highest grandeur. Therefore, in the best versions, the last scene reverses all. Arthur died. Siegfried died. Roland died at Roncevaux. Dusk steals darkly over the gods. All this time we have forgotten Mordred, Hagen, Ganelon. All this time nature, the old enemy who only seemed to be defeated, has been gnawing away, silently, unceasingly, out of the reach of human power. The sun will cool. All suns will cool. The whole universe will run down. A life, every form of life, will be banished without hope of return from every cubic inch of infinite space. All ends in nothingness. Universal darkness covers all. True to the shape of Elizabethan tragedy, the hero has swiftly fallen from the glory to which he slowly climbed. We are dismissed in calm of mind, all passion spent. It is indeed much better than an Elizabethan tragedy, for it has a more complete finality. It brings us to the end not of a story, but of all possible stories. Enden sah ich die Welt. I grew up believing in this myth, and I have felt, I still feel, its almost perfect grandeur. Let no one say we are an unimaginative age. Neither the Greeks nor the Norsemen ever invented a better story. Even to the present day, in certain moods, I could almost find it in my heart to wish that it was not mythical but true. And yet, how could it be? What makes it impossible that it should be true is not so much the lack of evidence for this or that scene in the drama as the fatal self-contradiction which runs right through it. The myth cannot even get going without accepting a good deal from the real sciences. And the real sciences cannot be accepted for a moment unless rational inferences are valid. For every science claims to be a series of inferences from observed facts. It is only by such inferences that you can reach your nebulae and protoplasm and dinosaurs and submen and cavemen at all. Unless you start by believing that reality in the remotest space and the remotest time rigidly obeys the laws of logic, you can have no ground for believing in any astronomy, any biology, any paleontology, any archaeology. To reach the positions held by the real scientists, which are then taken over by the myth, you must, in fact, treat reason as an absolute. But at the same time, the myth asks me to believe that reason is simply the unforeseen and unintended byproduct of a mindless process at one stage of its endless and aimless becoming. The content of the myth thus knocks from under me the only ground on which I could possibly believe the myth to be true. If my own mind is a product of the irrational, if what seem my clearest reasonings are only the way in which a creature conditioned as I am is bound to feel, how shall I trust my mind when it tells me about evolution? They say, in effect, I will prove that what you call a proof is only the result of mental habits, which result from heredity, which results from biochemistry, which results from physics. But this is the same as saying, I will prove that proofs are irrational. More succinctly, I will prove that there are no proofs. The fact that some people of scientific education cannot by any effort be taught to see the difficulty confirms one's suspicion that here we touch a radical disease in their whole style of thought. But the man who does see it is compelled to reject as mythical the cosmology in which most of us were brought up. That it has embedded in it many true particulars I do not doubt, but in its entirety it simply will not do. Whatever the real universe may turn out to be like, it can't be like that. I have been speaking hitherto of this myth as of a thing to be buried, because I believe that its dominance is already over. in the sense that what seem to me to be the most vigorous movements of contemporary thought point away from it. Physics, a discipline less easily mythological, is replacing biology as the science par excellence in the mind of the plain man. The whole philosophy of becoming has been vigorously challenged by the American humanists. The revival of theology has attained proportions that have to be reckoned with. The romantic poetry and music in which popular evolutionism found its natural counterpart are going out of fashion. But of course, a myth does not die in a day. We may expect that this myth, when driven from cultured circles, will long retain its hold on the masses, and even when abandoned by them, will continue for centuries to haunt our language. Those who wish to attack it must beware of despising it. There are deep reasons for its popularity. The basic idea of the myth, that small or chaotic or feeble things perpetually turn themselves into large, strong, ordered things, may at first sight seem a very odd one. We have never actually seen a pile of rubble turning itself into a house. But this odd idea commends itself to the imagination by the help of what seem to be two instances of it within everyone's knowledge. Everyone has seen individual organisms doing it. Acorns become oaks, grubs become insects, eggs become birds. Every man was once an embryo. And secondly, which weighs very much in the popular mind during a machine age, everyone has seen evolution really happening in the history of machines. We all remember when locomotives were smaller and less efficient than they are now. These two apparent instances are quite enough to convince the imagination that evolution, in a cosmic sense, is the most natural thing in the world. It is true that reason cannot here agree with imagination. These apparent instances are not really instances of evolution at all. The oak comes indeed from the acorn, but then the acorn was dropped by an earlier oak. Every man began with the union of an ovum and a spermatozoon, but the ovum and the spermatozoon came from two fully developed human beings. The modern express engine came from the rocket, but the rocket came not from something under and more elementary than itself, but from something much more developed and highly organized, the mind of a man, and a man of genius. Modern art may have developed from savage art, but then the very first picture of all did not evolve itself. It came from something overwhelmingly greater than itself, from the mind of that man who, by seeing for the first time that marks on a flat surface could be made to look like animals and men, proved himself to excel in sheer blinding genius any of the artists who have succeeded him. It may be true that if we trace back any existing civilization to its beginnings, we shall find those beginnings crude and savage. But then, when you look closer, you usually find that these beginnings themselves come from a wreck of some earlier civilization. In other words, the apparent instances of, or analogies to, evolution which impress the folk imagination operate by fixing our attention on one half of the process. What we actually see all round us is a double process, the perfect dropping an imperfect seed, which in its turn develops to perfection. By concentrating exclusively on the record of upward movement in this cycle, we seem to see evolution. I am not in the least denying that organisms on this planet may have evolved. But if we are to be guided by the analogy of nature as we now know her, it would be reasonable to suppose that this evolutionary process was the second half of a long pattern, that the crude beginnings of life on this planet have themselves been dropped there by a full and perfect life. The analogy may be mistaken. Perhaps nature was once different. Perhaps the universe as a whole is quite different from those parts of it which fall under our observation. But if that is so, if there was once a dead universe which somehow made itself alive, if there was absolutely original savagery which raised itself by its own shoulder-strap into civilization, then we ought to recognize that things of this sort happen no longer, that the world we are being asked to believe in is radically unlike the world we experience. In other words, all the immediate plausibility of the myth has vanished. But it has vanished only because we have been thinking it will remain plausible to the imagination, and it is imagination which makes the myth. It takes over from rational thought only what it finds convenient. Another source of strength in the myth is what the psychologists would call its ambivalence. It gratifies equally two opposite tendencies of the mind, the tendency to denigration and the tendency to flattery. In the myth, everything is becoming everything else. In fact, everything is everything else at an earlier or later stage of development, the later stages being always the better. This means that if you are feeling like Mencken, you can debunk all the respectable things by pointing out that they are merely elaborations of the disreputable things. Love is merely an elaboration of lust, virtue merely an elaboration of instinct, and so forth. On the one hand, it also means that if you are feeling what the people call idealistic, you can regard all the nasty things in yourself or your party or your nation as being merely the undeveloped forms of all the nice things. Vice is only undeveloped virtue, egotism only undeveloped altruism. A little more education will set everything right. The myth also soothes the old wounds of our childhood. Without going as far as Freud, we may yet well admit that every man has an old grudge against his father and his first teacher. The process of being brought up, however well it is done, cannot fail to offend. How pleasing, therefore, to abandon the old idea of descent from our concoctors in favour of the new idea of evolution or emergence, to feel that we have risen from them as a flower from the earth, that we transcend them as Keats's gods transcended the Titans. One then gets a kind of cosmic excuse for regarding one's father as a muddling old mimer, and his claims upon our gratitude or respect as an insufferable Stammenlied. Out of the way, old fool. It is we who know how to forge Nothung. The myth also pleases those who want to sell things to us. In the old days, a man had a family carriage built for him when he got married and expected it to last all his life. Such a frame of mind would hardly suit modern manufacturers, but popular evolutionism suits them exactly. Nothing ought to last. They want you to have a new car, a new radio set, a new everything every year. The new model must always be superseding the old. Madame would like the latest fashion. For this is evolution, this is development, this is the way the universe itself is going. And sales resistance is the sin against the Holy Ghost, the élan vital. Finally, modern politics would be impossible without the myth. It arose in the revolutionary period, but for the political ideals of that period it would never have been accepted. That explains why the myth concentrates on Haldane's one case of biological progress and ignores his 10 cases of degeneration. If the cases of degeneration were kept in mind, it would be impossible not to see that any given change in society is at least as likely to destroy the liberties and amenities we already have as to add new ones, that the danger of slipping back is at least as great as the chance of getting on, that a prudent society must spend at least as much energy on conserving what it has as on improvement. A clear knowledge of these truisms would be fatal both to the political left and to the political right of modern times. The myth obscures that knowledge. Great parties have a vested interest in maintaining the myth. We must therefore expect that it will survive in the popular press, including the ostensibly comic press, long after it has been expelled from educated circles. In Russia, where it has been built into the state religion, it may survive for centuries. For it has great allies. Its friends are propaganda, party cries, and bilge, and man's incorrigible mind. But that is not the note on which I would wish to end. The myth has all these discreditable allies, but we should be far astray if we thought it had no others. As I have tried to show, it has better allies too. It appeals to the same innocent and permanent needs in us which welcome Jack the Giant Killer. It gives us almost everything the imagination craves: irony, heroism, vastness, unity and multiplicity, and a tragic close. It appeals to every part of me except my reason. That is why those of us who feel that the myth is already dead for us must not make the mistake of trying to debunk it in the wrong way. We must not fancy that we are securing the modern world from something grim and dry, something that starves the soul. The contrary is the truth. It is our painful duty to wake the world from an enchantment. The real universe is probably in many respects less poetical, certainly less tidy and unified than they had supposed. Man's role in it is less heroic. The danger that really hangs over him is perhaps entirely lacking in true tragic dignity. It is only in the last resort, and after all lesser poetries have been renounced and imagination sternly subjected to intellect, that we shall be able to offer them any compensation for what we intend to take away from them. That is why, in the meantime, we must treat the myth with respect. It was all, on a certain level, nonsense. But a man would be a dull dog if he could not feel the thrill and charm of it. For my own part, though I believe it no longer, I shall always enjoy it, as I enjoy other myths. I shall keep my caveman where I keep Balder and Helen and the Argonauts, and there often revisit him.
Today, I wish to convey a comforting truth. God will open paths in your life that you never thought possible. Indeed, He is the consummate waymaker. You may have encountered this notion before, but let us reflect on it anew. The prophet Isaiah speaks of the Lord who carved a path through the sea, leading His people through mighty waters. He is the one who gathered chariots and armies, rendering them powerless, extinguished like a mere wick. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. Even the wild creatures honor Him, jackals and owls, because He provides water in the dry places, streams to refresh His chosen people, those formed to proclaim His glory. I have seen this truth manifest in my own life, especially during times when despair threatened to overtake me. Through these experiences, I have learned that God is capable of forging paths where none seem to exist. He does not require anyone's approval to act. His will is sufficient in itself. Trust in Him, for He is ever faithful, crafting a future that transcends our understanding and offering hope where there once was none. God acts in miraculous ways, often in His own perfect timing. Lewis reminds us that we are not the architects of our own destiny. The course of our lives is not solely within our control. Rather, we dwell securely in God's hands. As Jeremiah assures us, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." When life knocks you down, casting you into what seems an insurmountable predicament, hold fast to this truth. God always makes a way. As you journey through the many paths of life, reaching what appears to be the end of the road, remember that He will always provide an opening for you. Worry, uncertainty, and fear may not vanish at once. They are stubborn companions on our journey. Yet, it is essential to make a conscious decision and affirm to yourself, "No matter what happens, I will believe in God." This declaration is not merely a statement, it is a commitment to trust in the divine providence that guides us through darkness into light. For in Him we find hope, and in hope we discover the strength to persevere. Lewis reminds us that Christianity asserts a profound truth. Every individual human being is a divine masterpiece, conceived from all eternity for a unique role in the grand design of creation. When I speak of a unique role, I mean a position that no one else can occupy. Moreover, Christianity asserts that the relationship each soul has with God is, and must be, infinitely private and unique. God bestows individual attention upon each soul, as if that soul were the sole creation of His hand. He does not grow distracted or weary. He knows and loves each one intimately, shaping and guiding them, creating paths and opportunities specifically tailored for their journey. This remarkable mystery of our faith reveals that an infinitely great God can also be infinitely small, Lord of all creation, while being entirely present with a single individual. This truth assures us that even in moments of confusion or feeling lost, God is crafting a path for us, one that may be unlike any He has ever forged before. He is the author of our lives, constantly writing new stories, opening new avenues, and guiding us toward destinations we could scarcely envision. Yet we must be vigilant. Our adversary, the devil, will relentlessly strive to ensnare us in the same struggles. Just when you feel you have triumphed over worry, he will seek to reintroduce it, determined to pull you down once more. In the Screw Tape Letters, Lewis conveys that during times of profound desolation, we have the chance to cultivate a courage that would remain dormant in periods of ease. The faculties not engaged in pleasure must be harnessed to resist despair. Faith can be practiced, learned, and strengthened precisely in those moments when it seems least likely. This is the true opportunity, but you must guard it, ensuring that the enemy never perceives it as such. Present your mind with visions of dire and terrible futures, rather than those that are feasible and real. Stimulate within you the misguided belief that your decisions hold greater weight than they truly do, and foster the foolish notion that your failures are final. Yet, remember this: all victories, no matter how small, are cumulative. In moments when you feel hopeless and helpless, do not forget that your God is a way-maker. He will forge a path through the desert and miraculously create new doors where you believe all have been shut against you. As Psalm 34:19 reassures us, the righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. Consider the poignant words of King David in Psalm 121. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. There is but one true source of help, God Himself. While assistance may come from others, or perhaps through your own efforts, the pressing question remains: who will aid you when those you rely on find themselves in turmoil? The most infallible help throughout time springs from the Lord. He stands ready to support you, a steadfast presence amidst life's uncertainties, ensuring that no matter the circumstances, hope remains alive and accessible. Many of us often seek help from friends, family, and various sources, neglecting to turn to the Lord. Our help does not arise from the mountains or the hills. It is rooted in God alone. He may choose to use anyone He desires, yet it is essential to understand that He wants to help you directly. Therefore, do not fall into the habit of attempting to dictate to Him how He should resolve your circumstances. Consider the Israelites at the Red Sea. In their moment of dire need, God did not provide a cargo ship or a boat. Rather, He instructed Moses to part the waters, enabling them to cross on dry ground. God remains in the business of creating paths where none exist. Understand that no one can predict the ways of God. Frustration often arises when we cling to a particular route we expect Him to take, while God may be beckoning our attention elsewhere. Stop trying to predict God, as Isaiah reminds us, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. Isaiah 55:8-9. You might wonder why I speak so fervently about worry and fear. It is because these two forces can easily obscure our recognition of God's power. Matthew 6:34 instructs us, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Worry can lead you to attempt to predict God's actions, causing many to miss His movements in their lives. He will create a path for you and illuminate the darkness surrounding you, but you must believe. Isaiah 43:16 assures us, this is what the Lord says, He who made a way through the sea, a path through the mighty waters. Beloved, the act of doing something new, performing miracles, and making a way are God's domain. Your role is to trust and obey. If he instructs you not to worry or fear, then you must choose to heed his words. That troubled relationship can be restored. You can secure the job you've long desired, gain admission to college, find a soulmate, and be freed from debt. God is capable of all these things and more. He has done it before, and he remains unchanged. We all encounter difficult situations in life, many of which we cannot escape, for they often surpass our strength. Ask yourself, has any situation ever caught God off guard? Reflect on this truth found in Jeremiah 32:27. I am the Lord, the God of all mankind. Is anything too hard for me? Prolonged, unpleasant circumstances can lead to feelings of abandonment and forgetfulness. I once heard someone express, I know the scriptures say that nothing is impossible for God, but my situation has lingered so long that I wonder if some things are simply too difficult for him. Such feelings are not uncommon. Yet, Psalm 34:18 assures us, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I know your narrative will change when the Lord intervenes, for I have personally experienced his goodness, and many others have known his grace in myriad ways. So do not fear, for he is with you. Do not be dismayed, for he is your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. God intervenes not according to our desires, but in his own perfect timing, the most suitable moment for his divine purposes. He never leaves his children abandoned by the wayside. Rather, he guides you in his strength, leading you to your rightful place of habitation, for you are his redeemed. Let this profound truth settle into your heart. God will not send you on your journey alone. He walks beside you, illuminating the path ahead. Lewis reminds us that we are not tempted beyond what we can bear. God is faithful, and in our moments of trial, he provides a way out, enabling us to endure. Consider the prophet Elijah, who in his time of desperation believed he would surely perish. Yet God miraculously fed him, sending an angel and even a raven to provide sustenance. We can also reflect on the story of the widow of one of the prophet's sons, as recounted in 2 Kings 4:1-7. The wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha, Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord. But now his creditor is coming to take my 2 boys as his slaves. Elisha responded with compassion, asking her, How can I help you? This exchange reminds us that even in our darkest moments, when we feel utterly helpless, God is ready to provide assistance. He listens to our cries and offers a way forward, even when the situation seems dire. Tell me, what do you have in your house? Your servant has nothing there at all, she said, except a small jar of olive oil. Elisha said, Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside and shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put it to one side. She left him, and afterward shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, Bring me another one. But he replied, There is not a jar left. Then the oil stopped flowing. She went and told the man of God, and he said, Go sell the oil and pay your debts. You and your sons can live on what is left. Was it God who sent the angel to Elijah? Yes. Was it God who sent the raven to feed him? Yes. Was it God who made the widow's oil flow until it filled every borrowed jar? Yes. Yes, it was. Was it God who did all these things? Yes, he was. He made a way where all hope was lost. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. What leads you to believe that God cannot act in your situation today? As stated in Isaiah 46:10, I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. From the east he summons a bird of prey, and from a distant land a man to fulfill his purpose. What I have said, that I will bring about. What I have planned, that I will do. It is God who promises to make a way for you. So why, then, do you attempt to carve out paths and assume his role? Step aside and allow God to accomplish what he has promised. You cannot fulfill the mandate he has given you on your own. God understands that without his guidance and strength, you cannot respond effectively to his call in the place to which you are designated. If you try to bear the weight of his promises with your own strength, it will overwhelm you. As 1 Corinthians 10:13 reminds us, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. In a world filled with distractions and evil desires which seek to draw men toward eternal damnation, remember that God's provision is always available. Trust in his faithfulness and rest assured that he is at work, orchestrating a way for you to navigate even the most challenging circumstances. For this reason, when you are in Christ, you may encounter even fiercer temptations. Yet rest assured, God does not abandon you. Romans 8:26 tells us, in the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. He remains with you, teaching you to resist sin and fortifying you with his word. He empowers you in prayer to confront all forthcoming temptations. Remember the encouragement of 2 Timothy 2:22. Flee the evil desires of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Know this, every person faces temptations. You are not alone in your struggles. Lewis insightfully explains that faith, in the sense I mean, is the art of holding on to truths your reason has once accepted, even amid changing moods. If you are tempted to abandon your faith, consider that many before you have faced this very trial. Job experienced it, as did countless others. James 1:2-4 urges us to consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance complete its work, so that you may be mature and lacking nothing. Pay attention to the phrase, "He will also provide a way out." It is God who provides this escape, not you. The path away from an abusive relationship might not be found in another relationship, but rather in solitude with God, where healing can take place. If you rush into another relationship out of loneliness, you risk falling into pain once more. Sometimes God orchestrates an escape route, only for us to misinterpret it and return to what he seeks to free us from.